Hit record. Okay, Seth, go ahead.
Good morning, this is Seth. Leilani, do you mind running the slides for me?
No problem.
Perfect, thank you. Alrighty, so today's conversation or discussion is about Sage 300, also known as Timberline, payroll module, and some of the added features and functionality that can help make your job go easier, as well as some general information about the reporting that it's able to do as well. In our past, we had talked about My Assistant and what it's able to do for you. Keep in mind that as we go through this, the My Assistant can come into play and help you with some of the functionality of the payroll module as well, whether it be things like time entries and verification reports, as well as your weekly reports, sending out direct deposits, that kind of stuff. It can also be used for your error checking when you're doing your time entries as well. I've had a few clients implement that. So as we go through this discussion, if there's things that you see that trigger you to think, hey, could I make My Assistant run reports on it for me? More than likely, yes. So it's definitely a follow-up with what we've talked about in the past. So some of the functionality that's good about the payroll module is the different ways that you can get time into the system. It can be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet that maybe your project managers or superintendents are maintaining, and those can be formatted in a particular fashion, so you can import that into Sage. You can also have data entry screens. I'll show you a little bit of that in a few minutes. Different kinds of views. So for example, if you have just a data entry clerk where you want them to key in people's times but not see somebody's hourly pay rate, you can definitely modify the grids to do that. You can create as many grids as you want. I did have a client where they had a data entry person. All that person did was type in time cards, and they had over 500 time cards a week to enter. They obviously didn't want anybody to know anybody's pay for confidentiality reasons. And then they had the payroll administrator that would go through and process everything and verify the times and all that. So it's pretty easy to set up those different grids. You also have the ability to enter and track and also run lots of different styles of reports on things like your unions and prevailing wage. Union setups are very straightforward. You essentially have a union. Then you have a local, meaning that particular local group that's attached. So if you think of the electrical group as your union, you might have a particular city or region that's the local. And then inside your local, obviously, you have your different classification of employees, like apprentices 1 through 10, journeyman, foreman, that type of thing. And then the nice thing about the union setup is after you set those up, then you're able to add in all different kinds of pays, deducts, fringes that are outside the normal schema, like a regular or overtime pay. So things like a training fund or certain retirement funds or vacations that you have to pay into as a fringe benefit. Those union setups will allow you to do that based on those combination of union, local, and classifications. We also have the ability to enter and track and report on prevailing wage. There's everything from just the basic output reports that show you this particular prevailing wage job has these guys working on it, this number of hours in the state range, all the way up to using the Atrix integration to create your state mandated prevailing wage reports, and also the Fed ones as well. You can also set up specific job rate tables. So for example, if you have Bob and he's working at, say, $10 an hour, but it's not a prevailing wage job, but one particular job, for whatever reason, you have an agreement that he makes $20 an hour, and maybe there's 5 or 6 other staff that do that same job. You can create rate tables that will help the system determine their rate, and by default, Sage always picks the highest rate for somebody. So if his hourly rate's $10 an hour, but this particular job is $20, then when you go to key in the time, you don't have to remember, oh, hey, what should this guy get paid every week on this job. It automatically finds that for you and it pre-fills it. And the same logic applies if you're having a data entry clerk do stuff for you. It'll still pull all their applicable rates in when the person goes to process. So you don't have to worry about that not working for your admin person who's just doing the data entry. We can also set up different work comp rates and track that per job. I'll go into more detail with some screenshots on that. And then the last thing that's been around for quite a while, actually I think about 10 years now, 10 or 12, is the ability to generate your state and Fed reports through an integration point called Atrix. If you're not familiar with it, basically Atrix is a company that produces, maintains, and guarantees the accuracy of all state Fed forms. And then the farther east you go, like to the Ohio and East Coast range, they also have some of the local forms for different cities or municipalities. And they integrated with the majority of the Sage products, actually, not just Sage Timberline. And they offer that service that you're able to generate things like your 1099s, your W-2s, your quarterly reports, that kind of stuff. And they guarantee the accuracy of it. So you don't have to worry about checking that stuff as long as your data is correct. Okay, so Leyline, go to the next slide. So as I mentioned on the time entry, we have different ways to get it into the system. I have a number of clients who have created a spreadsheet that they send to their superintendents. The superintendents fill all that information in, and then the worker will either digitally sign it or they'll sign a piece of paper or a log to say that their hours are correct. And then on a hidden tab, we've created import files that they're able to send back to the payroll administrator and import a text file. We'll also go into more discussion on other ways to get the system as far as imports and third-party products and add-on products as well. You can enter it obviously in the grids like we mentioned. You can also push through Office Connector import if you've purchased that as one of your add-on products. They have the formats already set up. And then there's also web application interfaces like ADP and HH2 that offer the ability to track and enter your time via phones, iPads, that kind of stuff. And it links directly back to your system so that you essentially just have to go through and manage your entries and make sure they're correct versus having to sit there and type everything in, which is a great time saver. Okay, so next sheet. So when I mentioned the part about the grids, a lot of times people ask me how flexible are those? If you aren't familiar with the payroll module and haven't ever entered time, the picture on the lower left is just an example. It's from my sample data that I've got. And you'll notice on there I've got a handful of different time entry views. And each of those views then apply to the bigger picture over on the right side where we have different columns of data. So for example, you could have a daily grid where instead of the first column being job, you'd have a date column. And so you could literally type in, you know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday's dates, and then put in all those applicable job and pay rates and all that kind of information. Or you could have it really simple and just have the job, cost code, category, pay ID, and hours in a grid, and then save that. The enter check screen that you're seeing right now is what I typically use and teach my clients to use when it's a small shop in the sense of, you know, maybe 50 to 100 employees, because you can usually key those in pretty quick. And when you're in this screen, it gives you the ability to process the time, which basically means you're calculating all their taxes, garnishments, or deducts, however you want to call it, and then your company offered fringes. So you can see everything at a glance instantly. You can also hide different values in there, like if you don't want somebody to know certified class that they're in or a pay rate, we can definitely easily do that just by customizing the time entry view. And the time entry view, when I say customize, it's something that you as the user can do. As long as you've got security access, it's definitely not something that you have to have a consultant do. We typically teach you how to do it, and then you modify it as you need. There's quite a bit of flexibility there. Next slide. Okay, so on our unions, to go a little bit more detail, sometimes it's easier to understand visually. So like I said, you have a general union that you're going to be setting up. So in this case, on the screenshots, the upper left picture is the C&G union. It's a general laborers union. You'll put in all of the address and contact information like normal. Those will pre-fill on your reports when you run your union reports. And then after you set up your union, there's a button that has you create each of the different locals. And again, this is sample data that we're seeing. So in this case, there's a local 320 group. And again, they may have different addresses, so you can type all that information in. And then after you create all your different locals, and again, there's no limit on those, then you create each of the different classifications. So for example, in this case, I've got an apprentice as my first class that I set up on this union local. And you can create as many different classes as you need. And then in each of those different classes, in the grid below, you'll notice that we've got different pays, deducts, and fringes. And the thing to remember, which people sometimes forget, is when you go to set up these tables, these are anything outside the normal. So for example, you have, say, a sick policy if you're in California for your employees, that gets added to their employee setup. Their hourly rate gets added to their setup. Their overtime and their double time gets added. These pays are things like paying out union vacations, if you have that, or if you have certain dues and garnishments that the union requires you to take out, like a training fund, for example. And then all the fringes that you pay on behalf of that union agreement that you have, and their different rates. Just like on the employee setups, you can change your calculation method. So you can make it based on a formula, a percentage, a flat dollar amount, or in this case, most of these are set as default, which means go back and look at that particular pay, deduct or fringe, and see what its calculation method is. And then just to the right of that, you'll notice we've got amounts. So that's specific to this particular apprentice classification. When you go to create your other classifications, the grid is obviously starting out blank, but you can add in any pay, deduct, fringe that you need, or as few as you need based on their classifications. Okay, next slide. And then I mentioned the idea of creating rate tables. And the cool thing about rate tables is that obviously they're typically used for prevailing wage jobs, because prevailing wage jobs for most companies are paying at a much higher rate than their normal hourly rate, and there's usually some level of a fringe benefit added to it. Some customers will tell me that their employees are paid at a higher rate than the certified. So what happens if they work on a certified job? Well, if their hourly rate is higher than what we have here in the rate table, it will still pull the higher rate that you've given them, because Timberline always thinks that you want to give somebody as much money as possible when you pay them. So it goes through all of your rate tables, and you can have as many as you want. And then it also, at the very end, looks at their employee setup. And if they find a rate in any table that's higher than the employee setup, it uses that. So we have different columns that we can put in these different rate tables as search criteria. So in my case, on this one for the certified table, the certified table is based on the regular pay ID. And in that table, I have the job. I have a column to tell me or ask me what the certified class is. And then I have a column that asks if it's certified or not, which might be a little bit odd to think about. But if you have, for example, maybe a PM that goes out on the job site, maybe they're walking the job site, they're not really performing any work that's prevailing wage rate work, but they're still on the job, then you could come in here, for example, and say, hey, X job, X certified class. When they're not certified, it's this rate. And when they are certified, it's a different rate. And so you can put those two different rows in there. The other thing that I get asked a lot is, well, generally a certified report, typically we're only looking at the job and the class, and then we put a rate in. So why do we need all these other fields? Well, the great thing about a rate table is you can use it for anything. And like I mentioned earlier, maybe you've got a certain job that you agreed with the owner to say, these guys are going to do X, Y, Z work. And you go back to the guys and say, hey, it's outside your normal job specs, so we're going to pay you a slightly higher rate for it. You could create another rate table in the system that's based on, for example, the employee and then the job, and have a rate in there. So you can kind of pick and choose all these different table columns to do whatever you need it to. One thing I typically recommend to people is it's great to have rate tables, but you can get a little bit excessive in them and have too many. So if you can, whenever you create rate tables, I always encourage people to try and think big picture wise. Hey, can I use this rate table again later on just by changing the values in the table, different jobs, different employees? Or am I making this so specific it's only going to work for one job, which could be fine, but you don't want to have tons and tons of rate tables, because then you got to modify them and maintain them. And if you go to enter somebody's time and a rate comes up and it's not what you're thinking it is, you got to backtrack through all these rate tables. So minimal at times is good, but there is a lot of flexibility. Next slide. Workers' comp. So workers' comp, as we all know, calculates typically based on rates and classification codes or work comp codes. So Sage gives you the ability to put a work comp code on the employee setup and then create the work comp table that says, okay, based on X state and these different codes, here's what the amount should be. They also give you the additional ability to add in a layer in the middle, which is the cost code work comp table, which is that middle picture that we see. So we set up our fringe, we put in our cost code ranges, and then in each of those ranges, we assign different codes. So that way, if you've got Bob working on a job, he's doing different kinds of work, different kinds of cost codes, you can more accurately track your workers' comp values on that versus just giving him X amount for each job. So it will find the cost code range, it puts in the code, and then it goes to the third picture on the right, says, okay, where's my state? What's this code? Okay, here's my amount that I put in. When you're doing your work comp setups, most of the time that I talk to clients, work comp's automatic. Obviously, the owners of the companies don't typically have it, and that's fine. They'll typically create a comp code like 9999, and they'll put that on the employee setup for the owners, and that way when they calculate their payroll, it just calculates a zero amount for the fringe. So typically you can add in to make it automatic, so every time you set up a new employee, it just automatically adds that fringe to it. One less thing you have to think about. So then next screen. And then we also have, as I mentioned, the state and Fed forms. So on the state side, when you go into Atrix, depending on your user level, you might be prompted to update it. It just depends on how often you go into it. After you get it all updated and you're good to go, it asks you what state you're going to work in. And then based on the states, it will change that select a report list that you see on the screenshot, where it'll list out any reports that they have created for that particular state. Obviously, towards the East Coast, you may have more local municipalities that have different forms, so that list will grow. As you click on each of those different forms, the description over on the right will give you a brief summary of what it is. And then just to the bottom of that, where it says period and year, we can pick whatever period we want and the year that we want to run the report on, and we can generate those reports. When you're done generating the report, it gives you the ability to save them and come back later and change them if you need, or modify them, or print them again. You also have the ability to print and mail them out if you wanted, or you can electronically file. The electronic filing is a good way to do things because it saves you a lot of time. And some people will say, well, I don't want to pay to electronically file and I can do it myself. I had a CPA tell me once that he ran the numbers and most of his staff was pretty close to minimum wage. And he said that he calculated that roughly about the 30 mark is when it was not cost effective to have them do it. So anything over, say, on W-2s or 1099s, for example, if he had to print and generate more than about 30 of them, it was costing him more money in hourly wage to have his employees print, stuff them in an envelope, lick the envelope, stamp it, and take it to the post office than it was to have electronically filed. So it's just one of those things where it is an added service to be able to do. You just have to figure out what that price point is as far as your willingness to do that. The Atrix forms, obviously, if you make a mistake, you can go in and update them and they'll send amended forms. So it can do that for you. And then you can also pull up your old forms because it does store them indefinitely. And so if you said, hey, I generated all my W-2s middle of January 2019, one of my employees came back and said he needs a W-2 for his tax purposes. You don't have to file anything different. You just literally pull up the saved one you've got and you can reprint it off for that individual. So it helps reduce all of the paper that you're storing in your file cabinets. Okay. We have our Fed forms, things like the W-2s, the quarterly reports, 941s and all that. It does maintain to some extent the prior year's stuff. So obviously, if the payroll module, for example, only has 2 years worth of data, then you can't pick a 4-year back and say, print out the W-2s from 4 years ago. So there is a little bit of thinking we have to do on this. But generally speaking, you can get 2 years worth of stuff on a lot of the Fed reports and then print those out, generate them, save them, and you're good to go. So same logic as the state ones.
Okay. Well, before we get into questions, and I want you guys to all get to thinking about any question that you have for Seth. Before coming to TAG, he worked directly for Sage Technical Support, wrote knowledge base articles. He's a great resource. So please take advantage of sending in your questions in the chat box. We have a little bit of a resource on the scenario where you would like to have a payroll service handling all that for you. And many of our clients do take advantage of that. So we wanted to just introduce you guys to someone that we've worked with before. Her name is Jessica Moody. And she's just going to talk to you a little bit about how we work hand in hand together and some of the benefits that you might have working with her and her team. So, Jessica?
Thank you, Leilani. Yes, so my name is Jessica Moody. My background is in human resources. So prior to working with ADP, I was running payroll for a 375-man company. I get the and understand all those complications that come with running a payroll and having to produce time cards and so forth. So I am the construction lead for the West Coast for ADP, which is why I run into Sage 300 Timberline a lot and why Leilani and I have a partnership. So on the next slide, I'll just show you a little bit about what we can do. So typically, today I'll talk about payroll and time and attendance, but I want you to know that ADP is more than just payroll. It's actually only about 18% of our business these days. So we do everything from recruitment to retirement, from background checks to 401k, analytics and benchmarking, performance, ACA, and so forth. So we'll dive deep into the payroll and time and attendance on the next couple of slides. The first slide I want to show you is our payroll dashboard. So like Leilani said, although you may have Sage 300 for your accounting features, you may want a robust payroll system that's going to do your tax filing, your quarterly and your annuals. You may want to give your manager self-service. We also will provide a free mobile app where your employees will have self-sufficiency. They'll be able to review their paycheck stubs, request time off. We also process your wage garnishments, so everything from calculating, prioritizing, and paying, as well as the new hire reporting for each state, and so forth. So these are some of the reasons that people want to outsource their payroll to ADP. And what you're looking at here is our Workforce Now technology. It is one streamlined database, whether you have just the payroll module or payroll time all the way to retirement. This is where you process your payroll here on one screen. We have everything enhanced for you to be able to view all your reports right here without having to run anything additional. So it's meant for you to run an efficient payroll on one screen. On the next slide, I will talk about our time and attendance options. So sometimes you have to use an industry-specific software, which is great. We can import that, and I'll show you that in just a second. But here, if you wanted to use ADP's time and attendance as well, we do have 4 different options for you. The most frequent that I see in the construction vertical is the biometric time clock. If you have like a warehouse, that's where we implement that. But a lot of times it's the mobile app, right? You've got guys doing runs and loads out to job sites and a foreman on the job site. So the mobile app is the one that we see for that. So that's a free mobile app that comes with our time and attendance solution. We also have the web timesheet. So for your office employees, accounting, IT, HR, et cetera, who are in the office and sit at a computer, they're able to log in and clock in and out using the portal as well. So those are just a few of our time and attendance solutions. But like I said, I hear it a lot, you guys have specific time and attendance software. That's fine too. We're able to import that file into ADP Workforce Now, and you're able to see it in a payroll grid in the lower right-hand screen. So even though you import it, you're still able to manipulate the data as needed. The last thing here I wanted to show you on the next slide. Oh, and that is it. So, so just know that I'm here for you. You can get my information from Leilani. Again, Jessica Moody from ADP. We're able to provide everything from recruitment to retirement.
Thanks, Jessica. So I will go ahead and unmute everyone that has called in, and also feel free to use the chat box to send in any questions that you have for Seth, our Sage 300 CRE consultant, or for Jessica about what they offer at ADP. Feel free to send those in, and we'll try and get those answered for you. And again, we are recording this session. I know some folks just popped in, so we will email this out so that you have the full presentation. And if you'd like the slide deck as well, I can forward that along as well. Feel free to use our email as well. We're happy to do these webinars, and we'll be back next Wednesday. We are also taking new topic requests for next quarter. So we have a few requests on form design and things like that within 100 Contractor. Again, we do these every Wednesday. 100 Contractor and 300 CRE topics. If you have other topics that you'd be interested in, go ahead and email them over to me. Thanks everyone for joining. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will send this out via email.